claim that our eyes were just either slightly different from what they are. We thought we see things that are not normal.
Welcome to Strange Familiars. How you doing tonight, Allison?
I'm doing well.
That's good to know. Well, on tonight's show, I'm going to be talking with TJ, who has a group of really, really interesting stories, including that she survived a serial killer. Like a serial killer lived next to her grandmother. And
Like one people have heard of?
she said you could look him up. I hadn't heard of him, but she gave his name. She said you could look him up.
I mean, isn't that the tragedy of our age, and that there are serial killers around that we haven't heard of?
Right. But she said she was a little girl, and he tried to grab her in the woods and tried to grab her cousin as well. It's a pretty harrowing story.
Wow.
And she thinks that apparently he'd been burying bodies on his property, and even her grandmother's property.
Oh, that's horrific.
Yeah, and she thinks that some of the spirit activity around there might be like the ghosts of the victims that were buried there and stuff. It's a pretty intense story. But along with that, she has stories of growing up with her other grandmother who lived out in the country, and she grew up with what they call Wooly-Boogers, which is a southern name for Bigfoot.
Oh, okay.
Big hairy things in the woods. And she tells some great stories about that too. So it's a whole selection of stories with this serial killer ghosts and these Wooly-Boogers. Super interesting. We'll get to that in just a bit. Chad's last event, his last walk with a woodsman for 2024, is September 14th, and that's at Sunnerwald Natural Foods. It starts at 9 a.m. September 14th, it says camp lighting is the theme.
So this is kind of a fire walk with me kind of thing?
I suppose so. 9 a.m. starts with wilderness skills, so that'll be that, and then there's a break, and then 11 a.m. until noon is the foraging walk you get to do with Chad. So again, that's at Sunnerwald Natural Foods. That's in Spring Grove, Pennsylvania. 717-225-3825 is the phone number for that. Go ahead and see Chad, and you can learn some foraging and some other skills. Again, that's September 14th. Is that?
That's this Saturday.
That's this Saturday, September 14th. So one of our patrons, and he's been a guest on the show, and he's the one who sent me the cast of the Three-Toed Tracks from out there in western Pennsylvania, Chadwick. He is different Chad than Chad Redding. Chadwick is doing this Face of Horror thing, I guess, where you can vote on horror fans, and he's trying to win this, and he asked me if I would promote it for him. I said, why not? Sounds like fun. So it's faceofhorror.org/2024/Chadwick-Gales. That's a lot. So what I'll do is I'll put that link in the show notes, and you can go to the show notes and you can find that. And he's just asking everybody to vote for him. He wants to be the face of horror, I suppose.
How does one do that? Is this like for some sort of technical ability, or just as a fan?
I think it's a fan thing. To be honest, I'm not that familiar with it. Let's see. Yeah, I guess it's to be featured in Rue Morgue magazine, and it's just like a horror fan kind of thing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it would be cool if a Strange Familiars listener got that. That'd be a neat thing. So if you feel so inclined, that link will be in the show notes. You can go vote for Chadwick there. All right, let's go ahead and listen to my interview with TJ. I'd like to welcome TJ to Strange Familiars. How are you doing tonight?
Well, thank you.
Well, I'm very excited to get your stories, which there seems to be a good few of them and a good variety of them. So this is exciting for me. How do you want to start attacking these? You want to go chronologically from when you were young, or?
Chronologically probably makes the most sense.
It usually does. I think that keeps people from getting too, like, oh, I forgot this, I forgot that kind of thing. Unless there's something. Sometimes it makes sense to tell one first and then go back. But yeah, I think chronologically works best. Most often. So I guess how early did this stuff start for you?
My whole entire life has been very strange. My earliest memory is actually surviving a serial killer who was also our neighbor. And the other half of my earliest memories were with my grandmother. Well, actually, both took place with my grandmother. That probably makes most sense to start there. One of my grandmothers lived in just outside of Birmingham City in the suburbs there. Her neighbor in the suburb we lived in, he was a serial killer proper. His name was, I think, Jack Trawick. You can look him up, but his information's been sealed because it's really gruesome. But that was my neighbor. And I spent time between my two grandmothers because my mother was very sick when I was growing up. So I was there or with my other grandmother who lived out in a real holler, like a real Appalachian holler, and a lot of weirdness out there. I had Bigfoot experience, tons of Bigfoot experiences there. My great granny and grandma out in the holler, they had a clan of Bigfoot that was like nearly domesticated. I mean, it's very strange. Also, a lot of spiritual stuff in the churches back there. Very spiritual background, but a very old spiritual background from there. And then I have my family closer to the city who their neighbor was a serial killer, and he attempted to abduct me when I was maybe 4. I mean, it was before kindergarten. And it was in the woods between our two properties. There's a tree line there, just a little patch of woods. And he actually buried his victims there and some in our property. It was a pretty big property we have there in the suburbs. Because suburbs out here in Alabama, they're kind of just farms after a point. So, yeah. And I saw him in the woods and he scared me. And I ran back to my grandmother and told her what happened. And I called him a purple-eyed monster. But then when I actually calmed down and was able to say what I saw, it was a man in sunglasses. And I described him, and it was our neighbor. And then a few weeks later, the federal officers were interviewing my family because he had definitely committed a lot of very gruesome crimes and murder and such. So that's kind of how I grew up.
Wow. How did you find out that bodies were buried on your property? Did the police or the feds end up like digging them up or something?
Yes, they did.
Wow.
There wasn't much that we know of, like buried in our part. But I will tell you, they were not very thorough. And I think they kind of underestimated this guy because he didn't look like Bundy or, he was just just a guy, So me and my grandmother have always felt like maybe there was more out there because he admitted to more murders than there were bodies.
Wow.
In his confession. And my grandmother and I theorized, because obviously this is very close to home, that either there's still somebody out there, which, we have a lot of paranormal evidence to say there may be, or in his mind, he somehow thought that he did actually catch me. He also tried to abduct my aunt from the same property. She was in college at the time. And we had a very long driveway. How long do you think their driveway is, Sean? I'm asking my husband. I'm not good with the distance. Pretty long. So about 80 yards. That sounds right. So it's a pretty, it's a long driveway, and it's covered in trees. Yeah, it's very long. And the way it's built is the house is built on a big, big hill. Like this is like the foothills. So both places I'm living are like nestled into hilly mountain. So the driveway is built on this big slope, and there's probably the driveway, and then 6 feet down it's just a big concrete wall, basically, this driveway that goes on the size of a football field. And then it's a big drop, and it's just woods. And he was down beneath the concrete part of the driveway, so he would have been level with my aunt's ankles as she's walking this football field length, but there's no light poles or anything. It's just pitch black till you get to the house and the floodlight comes on. And he's down there and he's like, hey, come here. Hey, come here. Help me. Hey, come here. And this is midnight. She's coming in. She's in nursing school. She's coming in from a shift. And it wasn't a few weeks later that he was getting arrested, and we found out he was abducting and murdering and more to women in our neighborhood and in our city in Birmingham in Alabama. This was the early 90s. And we fit his MO perfectly. He just, with the same house within a week, tried to abduct myself as a young child and my aunt as a teenager, basically. And we managed to get inside before he got to us, but he did murder many women and right there beside us in his home in the basement and try to bury them in the yard.
So did you, I mean, obviously he was trying to get you guys, but other than that, did you have a creepy feeling about this neighbor like this, or did you just not run into him before?
So I was very young, and the only thing I really remember is just like flashes of very scary things and like feds. You know, I was barely kindergarten age. My aunt remembers a little bit more, and she said that it's a very sleepy southern town. It's actually the town. You heard of fried green tomatoes?
Sure. Yeah.
That's where I'm from.
Okay.
Literally, it's across the interstate from my house, that restaurant. And it ain't changed much. It's a very sleepy southern town, and it's very quiet, and everybody either keeps to themselves or tends to be a pretty good person. So yeah, I mean, he creeped people out around the neighborhood. I mean, he was just kind of odd, but nothing that made us think that he was doing heinous things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Oof. Well.
Yeah. So, but we have a lot of ghosts there from him. I guess I'll just go into that part of it.
Yeah.
This is why I was like confused in tandem. So also I mentioned my like family out in the holler and how they were very spiritual. And this was a very different, very old kind of spiritual. The church we went to is Pentecostal, but it was sort of a branch of Pentecostal that was a little more relaxed, just very earthy and natural. My grandmothers were healers, and by that I mean faith healers. Have you heard of like faith healers? They actually used to come up to Pennsylvania to pray with an Amish powwow. I wish I would have gotten the location. That kind of medicine, old. Yeah, I know a lot of some powwow stuff from my great granny and granny. They would go to Pennsylvania together once a year up until their 90s to see this very specific powwow doctor. My grandmother was in a traveling gospel band, and they would play with a lot of like the Amish bands in places, and she met a powwow doctor along the way. And as her, it was odd that but they would go up there. So she would do stuff like that. So they really taught me a lot of old medicine, a lot of mountain medicine. And with that is a lot of spirituality comes with that. So I was always told like, yes, there are spirits. Yes, you can see them. This stuff is absolutely real. Spirits are real. Ghosts are real. Demons are real. All of that's real. And I'm a child. So of course, that sticks with you. So I didn't have the chance to wonder if ghosts were real. I was just told like, yep, they're real. So I think that is one thing that really allowed me to have these experiences I've had my whole life, because I was told how to handle myself. I was told that it is real. It's very weird, but you have authority. So I was just raised very differently in that aspect.
Mm-hmm.
So going back to the property where the murders had occurred, I have a lot of weird stuff happen to me in dreams, and I've always been a fan of kind of meditating. I was an only child for 11 years, so I had the chance to sit quietly a lot, and a lot of people didn't have that. So in that, I've noticed things, and I kind of just observe. So I was staying with my grandmother for a time, and I was living they have like a finished out basement, and I was down in the basement, and we've always had weird activity around that house ever since those murders happened. Just shadows, knocks, typical haunting stuff. But my grandmother just refuses to believe in ghosts because she's just like, no, I can't let myself believe that. But she's like, but I believe you're experiencing these things. But it was pretty undeniable. So one night I am laying in my bed downstairs, and my door creaks open, and I feel like I'm asleep, like I might have, drifted off to sleep, and like I'm dreaming, because it's kind of a weird in-between state that I'm in, but I didn't actually remember falling asleep, so I'm not sure. So my door drifts open, and I have a couple of cats that were down there with me, and there was like my room and then a big open space that was finished out, and then a door to the outside. And this girl, this figure of a girl is just standing there in the doorway where it kind of opened. And it's very, very vivid. I don't normally see too much detail when I see stuff like that. This is one of the most intense experiences I've had. She was gray, like her skin was like gray and just kind of odd, but I could very clearly tell it was a girl. She had kind of blue silk clothes looking, light blue. They were kind of torn or dirty. It was hard to tell with the clothes. The face is what I noticed the most. She looked very bruised and kind of her cheeks sunken in, and she looked like she had either wet hair or something in her hair. She looked rough and just kind of off. And she was moving weirdly, but she was so vivid. I remember thinking, I have to be dreaming. And she motioned with her hand for me to come here. And I just remember this impulse, this irresistible impulse to just follow her. And I have had lucid dreams. So I was thinking I was in a lucid dream, and I was thinking, okay, I'll follow her because I'm dreaming. And I went through my door and I walked directly across the basement, and I had my hand on the door to leave the basement to go outside. And she was like, kind of like beside me. And I remember I was thinking in my dream, I don't want to go outside. And I pulled my hand away from the door to stop unlocking it. And I remember not being able to turn my head, not being able to look, like all of a sudden I wasn't dreaming anymore. I wasn't in control of the dream anymore. And I was very afraid, and I was kind of like frozen with my hand up, and I could just feel anger just coming off of her because I was like refusing to follow her outside. And then I woke up, and she wasn't there, except I wasn't in my bed. I was actually standing at that door.
Oh, wow.
Yes. And I looked around, and all of my cats had their ears laying down and their hackles were up. And I had 3 cats. And I remember very distinctly thinking, okay, that was a very vivid sleepwalk dream. And then I turned around and saw all of my cats with like their hair standing up, which is just very alarming to see from 3 cats at one time, all looking right at me with their hackles up. So I just grabbed the nearest kitty and like ran back to the room and shut the door.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
I mean, that's like, that's chilling,
Yeah.
and you want like,
Yeah.
given what had happened before, you wonder like, what was she trying to like lead you to her grave or something,
What did she want?
Right.
Yeah. And I like I said, I've always been very spiritual. A big thing in my family is tending graves. We're very big about taking care of graves, just things of that nature. So I'm very comfortable with the concept of death. It's just part of the faith healing, as we attended a lot of funerals as, faith healers and such, to be there for the family. And I worked with my grannies doing that. So I would speak to the spirits of these women who I knew were, murdered in my yard. And I would say, I'm so sorry. I hope you're at peace. Let me pray for you. So it didn't feel odd that one of them would come to me in a dream. So when I was having that dream, I guess I still don't know if I was awake or not. But when I was having that dream, I went with it because I had felt for them. I was almost a victim of his myself.
Right.
And I lived and I felt for them very much. So I have this connection with them that I've always felt like that he almost ended my life too. And, you were buried here and I'm living. And we had this bond, I guess. So I didn't think anything about it when they appear in my dream like that. But when I woke up and realized that it had somehow convinced me, even in my sleep, if so, to almost walk outside in the middle of the night. I mean, that's scary.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's a clock. I think I might have mentioned this in my email. Those big old iron garden clocks? Outside that basement door is a big old garden. I mean, it runs the length of that football field. And then behind that, that's just woods, and it goes on back to a river. So there's a big old garden clock right on the outside of that door. And on the same time, in the middle of the night, on the same day, every year, once a year, it stops. The same exact time, same exact day. The clock runs, no issues whatsoever, every other minute, day of the year, except for this one, for years. And it drove my grandfather crazy. And my grandmother actually said she thinks that it's the time of death for someone. That's, yes. So my grandfather set up like a trail cam to try and like see what was stopping it. Cause he thought he had mentioned it so many times to the family that, and we would ask, did the clock stop? And he would always say yes. And he's like, okay, now somebody's playing a joke on me, to keep it going or whatever. So he put out like a trail cam, and you can see it. It kind of ticks forward 1 minute, stops, ticks back 1 minute, and then then it's just done until he goes back out there and resets it. Every year on the same day at the same time, that clock just randomly stops. And right on the other side of that door is where she was trying to get me to go.
Huh. Wow.
Very odd.
Yeah. Yeah. That's super interesting. And the rest of the year, it runs fine.
Yeah. Every other day, every other minute. And it's always the exact same time. It's some odd, like 3:01 a.m., something odd like that.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That feels important.
Yeah. So we think that maybe it's time of death. So after that experience, I moved to the upstairs bedroom, which is still on the same side of the house, facing that neighbor's house, and still right up against the woods, maybe a few hundred feet from where the bodies actually were, the graves for the bodies were. I think some of them were potential graves, but still they were there in the basement. So I'm in that room, which is window overlooks those graves basically. And there's like those wooden doors that open and fold in on themselves. You know how I'm trying. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So there's those in front of the foot of the bed, and I'm laying in the bed, and I'm living there with just my grandfather and grandmother. So like everything, I know every sound in that house, their schedules, like they don't brush their teeth at a different time. Like I know every sound, and I'm a big reader. So I like to be quiet, and I'm laying in my bed and I'm just reading a book, trying to relax because I felt watched, quite frankly, but I learned to just kind of just be like, whatever. So, and then those wooden closet doors start just lightly kind of shaking every now and then, just kind of like that. And then I look up, and of course they stop. And it's like right when I'm getting engrossed in my book, or right when I'm probably kind of falling asleep, they start shaking. So I put my book down and I stare at them for a few seconds, and they just do like two very light shakes, like shake, shake. And then I just say like, you cut that out, because that's what everyone told me to do. And I was fine with that. So nothing really happened. So then I kind of fall asleep, sort of sitting up reading. You fall asleep reading, and your book just kind of like stays kind of in your hands and thumbs and kind of like lays on your chest, but you're still holding your book. And I just felt really odd. And I sat up and I saw that girl again, just standing at the foot of my bed, just staring straight into my face, just standing there right in front of me. And I reacted just to the sight of a human being form in my room. And I just instinctively just threw my book across the room and threw my book across the room, and it hit those closet doors and they shook. But it was like the instant before, it was like right when I threw the book, like I kind of regretted it. Like it was just a reflex. And I put my hands up to be like, oh, I'm so sorry. Like it was like my friend that had startled me or something. And it was before I could even be like, oh no, she was just gone. And that's really the only 2 times I've ever seen her
dressed the same,
vividly.
Dressed the same.
The same girl. Yeah.
Oh, wow. And that was it. Never saw her again.
No, not like that. The last time I saw her, we had a random power outage on our block for no reason. I don't know what happened, but it's very dark because this is like in the woods. And I had to close my front door, and I went to close my front door, and I was home by myself. My mom had texted me to let me know that the power went out, and she left. And I was in my room, but I just was kind of like, oh, it'll come back on soon or whatever. But my mom was like, oh, I left. And she lives across the street from this grandmother now, I should mention. So my mom and my grandmother still live in this property. And the mother's house that I'm speaking about is just across the street from this other house that I just talked about. So this is all still the same neighbor. So this would have been maybe, 25 years after the last time I saw her in my bedroom. And this is across the street at my mother's house, and the power goes out. And I have to go. We have a glass door and then a normal door. My mom tells me to go shut the front door and lock it. So I do. And as I'm going to shut it, I kind of just look out in the front yard because it's right in front of me. And I just see her standing just off the porch in the darkness. I had a little flashlight, and I had it pointed kind of down at the ground just so I could see. And I just kind of saw like blue pants, and I looked up and saw her for a flash of a second, and then she was gone, and I just slammed my door and got my dog and went back to my room. That's the last time I saw her. But yeah, I didn't see her for 20 something years before that. And just a flash of her at that random power outage like a year or two ago. And that's it.
Wow. Other than startling you, because like you said, you feel like kind of a connection with this. Is it super frightening? Like other than just it like being something, supernatural and startling when it just appears out of nowhere, but or do you feel more like you're trying to help, or you would like to try to help this spirit?
I feel like she's very scary to me because she is very vivid and very detailed. I've seen a lot, but I've never seen something so human.
Interesting.
And yeah, and that really bothers me. The only other time I have ever seen a spirit, ghost, apparition, whatever you want to call it, that was so detailed. Normally, you can't really make out much of a face. Like you can see that there's a face, you can kind of see features of a face, but I'm talking about like her it's like I'm looking at a person. The only other time I've ever seen that is I was driving home on this stretch of interstate that's pretty dark and dangerous down here in Alabama. It's like a huge interstate. And I came up on a truck that had flipped in the right lane. And there was like no emergency vehicles, nothing. It looked like it had ran off the road, like very slightly. And I don't know if this is like everywhere or just the South, but like the interstate, the train tracks just like cut over the interstate. So there'll be these random bridges in the middle of our interstates where the trains are coming through. And the truck it looked like it just hit this like surprise train bridge just the wrong way and it flipped. So I was going to get around it safely, and then I was going to call because, like I said, I didn't see any emergency vehicles. It looked like it had just happened, and I probably would have heard it if my music wasn't blasting. So I was going to call, and I kind of went around and then got back into my lane I needed to be in because my exit was coming up, and then I was going to call, and I looked up and I saw what I thought was like a man in the shadow. And I thought like, oh, wow, how did he get out of that? Like, there's no way he got out of that. I mean, it was upside down. And then I realized he was that same gray color as the girl from my nan's house. And his eyes were inhumanly large, like, like a look of surprise, like stuck, like a look of like if you were absolutely shocked and your face got stuck in that look of shock and you were just walking forward. And he was just had this huge look of just shock and surprise. And he was just walking straight forward. He didn't turn his head to look. He didn't wave to me. He didn't register that I was a vehicle on the road. This was just a very gray man, and I registered his face because he was right beside me, like a person close to me in the emergency lane there when I got over. And he just kind of appeared into my headlights in very vivid detail. And I cannot forget the look of shock on his face. And then I realized not only was his face that weird palette of gray, but his hair was that color of gray. His clothes was that weird color of gray, and I wasn't really able to register much of limbs or any normal movement. It was more of like the detail I could see was like there were legs and arms, but I didn't have time to really see that. I just saw like shirt, hair, beard, and huge look of shock, and everything was just like it was sculpted out of gray clay, and he was just walking forward and didn't register me at all. Those are the only times I've ever seen like a detailed face on something. I think he had just died when I drove past.
Yeah, I mean I mean, who can say? But it sounds like that. That seems like the way it was there. Oof. So do you think the fact that you were introduced to the concept of spirits, the reality, let's just say the reality of spirits, because I do believe they're real, at such a young age, and were never given the sort of, oh, don't believe in ghosts, ghosts are fake, blah, blah, blah. Do you think that has played into these experiences? In other words, made you more open, I suppose, to these experiences?
100%. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely. And this is why I believe I remember so much. And I say this a lot. I don't really know the serial killer and like the Appalachian healing grannies, that's a little weird. That's circumstantial to be. But as far as experiences, I think that we have a lot of experiences, all of us throughout our life.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that I remember them because they were normalized for me my whole life by my family.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes back to Bigfoot. I was never told what a Bigfoot was or is. I was told about Wooly-Boogers, though. And I can very clearly remember many encounters with the Wooly-Booger. And it wasn't until yours and Wes's show that I was able to connect Bigfoot to Wooly-Booger.
Interesting.
And yes, and I remember the moment that it happened. I was in my house and I was listening to one of your episodes. I was listening to you and Wes at the time, but I've always been obviously into like the ghosts and stuff, but I didn't really think about Bigfoot because I was one of those people that thought it was like this lone, like Mothman, like just one thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't think about that. And I heard you play some whoops and I was like, oh, I know what that is. And I would binge your podcast. Your Salome episode is absolute art, by the way. So I would binge your podcast. So I didn't know what I was really hearing. So I remember being like, what's this? And I looked at the episode and I was like, Bigfoot. And I couldn't stop listening because I had not heard that sound since childhood. And and you're going to think I'm nuts, but I was so comforted by those sounds and finally figured out what it was because it was this weird thing my whole life. I never could figure out what the Wooly-Booger was or what those sounds were. And that started this whole thing where I was just obsessed with strange familiars and Sasquatch Chronicles because it was finally giving me answers because by the time I was putting all this together, my grannies had died and I couldn't ask them about it.
Ah, yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
I've often said that, like, I think there probably are these little pockets in the country, and less as time goes on, as podcasts get popular and Bigfoot is everywhere, and people start to understand there's different names for him and so forth. But at least for a time, and I think probably still, there's pockets where people, I mean, I've had people tell me here in Pennsylvania, like, oh no, we don't have Bigfoot, we have something else. It was, they just had another name for it, but it's just another hairy thing in the woods, and it's just locally, that's what they called it. And then, Bigfoot's out west, right? So, nobody thought of them being the same thing. And I've often thought there's probably little locales where they just have different names for these things. And
yes,
they're just not talking about them because it's like, oh no, but it's not Bigfoot. It's the Wooly-Booger, right?
That's exactly what happened to me. Yeah. And it wasn't until I was educated on the fact that, it's not just one singular cryptid. This is a thing from multiple areas that's being seen, multiple ones. And then the descriptions of them, I very vividly remember seeing Bigfoot. I have been chased by them. I was saved by a Bigfoot for my whole life, I've believed it was two Sasquatch. Like one that was aggressive and one that I believe I grew up with that was protecting me.
Wow.
Because we gifted and that wasn't what it was called at all. My granny loved nature. Like I said, she was a mountain woman and a faith healer. Nature was our livelihood. We were, one with it. And she would tell me to take stuff out to a stump and say, this is for the Wooly-Boogers. And I would. And, of course they weren't there at the time. So I was just doing what I was told. But Yeah. So I was paced out and chased, and it was very terrifying. And it had all of the very confusing elements of, stopping and starting, like pacing, how they stop and start in unison. Very confusing to me. And I'm very comfortable in the woods, very comfortable. And then there was Mind Speak, the one that I believe I grew up with, told me, do not turn around, don't turn around. When I wanted to turn around, I thought I was being stalked by a mountain lion. There are a mountain lion down here. We see them often. And I'm down on a big creek. And I mean, this is the mountains, this Chandler Mountain. And I was going to turn around to confront the mountain lion the way I was told, and I, in my mind, was preparing myself to turn and raise my arms and be big and loud and scary to confront a mountain lion. And when I went to do that, I heard a noise on the other side of me, the side that I wasn't being stalked by something. And I was definitely being stalked. I heard another noise come up, and it kind of broke my focus, and I didn't turn quite yet. And in my head, in a voice that was not my own, very clearly, I heard, do not turn around.
Wow.
And I trusted it. And this went on for some time because I'm in the woods. This is forest, and I have to get back to a dirt road. And then that dirt road goes back to my granny's house. There's a cave down there. I was going to mess on this cave in a creek. Yeah, so I would go, and I would start off kind of nervous, and I just started kind of at a walking pace. And then I was very scared, and I was thinking about taking off, and I heard in my head again, not my voice, very calm, but very powerful, don't run.
Wow.
And yep. And so I did not, because I'm spiritual, and I was like, okay, I'm very intuitive. I have absolute fear and just primal terror. And I'm maybe 12, 13 at this time. So I'm young and alone. And so I have absolute terror, and I can hear it pacing me to one side. And then the other side is this other feeling of just familiarity and trust, but I can't see anything. But it's very loud what I hear, and it almost feels like the ground is shaking some, but it's mostly just very loud, and it was too loud to be invisible. Everything about it was just weird. So I'm walking as calm as I can, and then I kind of just, the scary one keeps getting closer and closer. So I kind of start walking faster, and I hear, don't run. So I just try to keep that pace. And I can remember like my fists were clenched. I had just tears streaming down my face, and I was just like breathing as steady and calm as I could. Like I was thinking, I'm gonna die. Like this is insane. I'm hallucinating this voice that's helping me because something is hunting me and I'm dead. So I just kept going, and it got very close to me, and it felt like I could almost feel breath on me. It felt that close, like some creature was so close to me that I could sense its presence. And right when that feeling was almost too much, in my head, very firmly, I heard, run. So I took off running, and I heard whatever was on the other side crash across this path I was on and crash into the woods. And it sounded like something very large tackled something else very large, and they rolled down the hill and down through the trees. And I ran home to my grandmother's house, and I ran into the foyer, and I slammed the door, and I was shook up. I was upset. And she came into the kitchen, out from the kitchen to the foyer. And she asked me what happened, and I told her everything that happened, everything. And she starts kind of laughing at me. And this was I was clearly upset and scared. And I said, why are you laughing? That was probably a mountain lion or two mountain lion. And two mountain lion, that's kind of crazy, right? I mean, I feel like that is more weird to me than like Bigfoot being down here. We only ever see like one at a time. But I'm telling her, I think I just got attacked by a mountain lion almost. I don't know. She starts laughing, and she's like, oh, look, what, a mountain lion? She's like, that was a woolly-booger. And I was like, a woolly-booger? And I thought that was like just like a silly thing they would like tease me with when I was a little kid. You know what I mean? Because they were playful, but they were not. Yeah. But she just matter-of-factly said, that woolly-booger almost got you. And then she went back to the kitchen.
Oh my goodness. All right. So many questions. So
I know, sorry.
The mind speak, you're assigning that to the one that was familiar with you as a protector, like in hindsight, then.
In hindsight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Had you ever experienced anything like that before? Like,
I had seen Bigfoot a lot before up in the trees during the day. Down here, they're black. So all the ones I've seen, I say down here, all of the ones I've seen, I believe it was a clan. They're black, but they had like and Wes actually helped me with this word, but they had a relationship with my great grandmother. These Bigfoot that I would see, and my great grandmother, and they would come knock on her house, which I know is kind of a common thing. But when the house knocks would happen with us, when I would be down at my great grandmother's house, she would tell me exactly what it was. And she would tell me, she would say, like, oh, listen here. Because she would start at the back of the house, like a knock, knock. And she was like, oh, listen here. And she would say, sit still and quiet. Just sit right here and quiet. And we'd have our curtains drawn. She always pulled her shades and curtains. If we were outside working the yard and the sun started going down, she would go inside, pull all of her shades, draw her curtains, and she was in for the night. She wouldn't come out for nothing. Her house would have to be on fire. You could not get this woman out at past sunset ever. And we would sit in her living room, and she would say, just be totally still and quiet. And the knock would move up the house, knock, knock, knock. And then when it would get to the wall of the room we were sitting in, it would go knock, 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 slap. Like, that's where you are. And then it would kind of be around the house. There was a little orchard there, the gifting site, I say, in my words, gifting site, not hers, was back a little bit from this house. And she would say, that's the Wooly-Boogers. They'll let you know when they're finished. Stay inside. They won't bother you. And she would not let me leave to go back to my other grandmother's house. They were on the same property, just right beside each other. She would not let me leave until we heard knock, knock, slap on the back of her house. And that meant they were leaving. And I thought that this was my grandmother playing a trick on me, because this was her mother's house I was in. It was just my grandmother and her mother at this time on this property, and myself. So just 3 people there. So I thought she was playing a trick on us until I actually lived at my grandmother's house, and I was in my room at my grandmother's house. And I say they, because I assume it was probably Sasquatch, they did it to me and let me know that they knew what room I was in up there at the other house. And there is absolutely no way that was my 89-year-old great grandmother in the middle of the night letting me know. And yes, and my grandmother I could see her from where I was sitting, and it would happen often. And I went to open my window one night because I smelled a weird smell, but I didn't hear any knocks. I just smelled like a gross, funky smell. And I had my shades drawn. It was kind of a rule around there. So I went to just kind of slip my fingers under the bottom of the shades there and pop the window open a crack. And I went to do that, and right on the other side of me at the wall, I just heard slam, like something just slammed its hand against the wall. Like, do not open your window. So I just laid back. Yeah. So I just laid back down. And I would hear stuff drop onto the roof, like kind of like a loud, like thunk, like really loud though. And my grandmother would be like, oh, it's a raccoon. And I would think that's not the height, size, or weight of any raccoon I've ever seen. It sounded like a big monkey dropped down on the house, thinking probably a younger one, while the bigger ones were down getting the food and the orchard. Like I said, we had an orchard and we had a garden and all of that. Feel like what I heard, just based off of size, had to have been a smaller one, because it sounded like it just dropped onto the roof, and the other ones would slap on the house. Because I would hear that same thunk on the house down at my great grandma's house when they would come knock on the roof. It almost sounded like something was on the roof and something was going down the side of the house.
Wow.
I know I'm saying all of this like it's incredibly normal.
No, I love this so much. So what did they tell you? Like, what did they tell you about Wooly-Boogers when you were growing up? Was it like
nothing?
Not like be careful in the woods, nothing like that?
Yeah, the rules for Woolly-Boogers is feed them, stay inside at night is best. If you do go outside, just have your wits about you. This was what she always told me night or day. If you're ever in the woods or on the property or anywhere and you feel uncomfortable or like you're being watched or like you should go, you should go. So, that's what I did. So anytime I would get that, like, ooh, I feel strange, or I feel like maybe I shouldn't be here, I would think, maybe I shouldn't be here. And then I would leave and I never had any problems. Yeah. So that was the rule. Don't go in the cave. I was told never, ever go in the cave, but there were bones in the cave. So I would try to go in the cave one time. I could get the bones there's a lot of owls, but this was kind of like bigger bones. But like I said, there's a lot of big cats back there. Mm-hmm. Like bobcats, all kinds. So I love bones. I've been creepy my whole life. I'm going to stay creepy. So I would go and try to collect these smaller bones. And I just, curious and wanted to go a little bit deeper into this cave because I was a pretty good kid and, don't go in the big spooky cave. Okay. But this day I was a little brave. I'd gotten a little older and I was trying to go into the cave. And behind me was the creek. You have to go up the creek to get to this cave. And there's no people going back there. So I was trying to go into the cave a little further than I normally do because hanging around the mouth of the cave was okay. But if I tried to step too close into the cave, rocks would just come flying at me from across the creek in a tree. And I would try to figure out where they were coming from and what it was and what was happening. But I could never figure it out. So I would just move away from the cave and they would stop. So I thought, okay, maybe there's some kind of weird tidal situation there, like maybe the fish jump there, or maybe a lot of bugs are coming out of the cave. But I never saw a fish jump, but I did see a rock fall at one point. But most of the rock throwing was just whiz past my head, but I could never exactly tell where it was coming from. Mm-hmm. But it was coming from kind of above.
Did your great-grandmother seem to be afraid, or she just knew the rules and stuck to the rules?
Yeah, it was sort of just like somebody telling you like standard operating procedure. Mm-hmm. Like, 6 o'clock is dinner, 8 o'clock we shut the doors because there's a Bigfoot. That's just how it felt.
Wow.
Yeah, that is why I think that I remember so many of these experiences, because when I would go speak to her about it, she would call them Woolly-Boogers, but she would also call them like spirits, but spirit in her terms was something more like an angel, like a guardian angel or a protector, like something like that. It was something that was explained to me was a Woolly-Booger, but she never said they were one and the same, but she kind of talked about them in the same light. And I kind of put them together. The Woolly-Booger and spirits were sort of just like things on this world, and some are here to help and some are here to harm. And there are some things that if you're just, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, that kind of thing. Yeah. And that was kind of her relationship with the Woolly-Boogers. But my family settled this land a long, long time ago. And even when I was young, she was a very old woman and a faith healer. So her mind she was just on a different level, I think.
Does your family still own this property?
No, my grandmother passed away in 2012 and the property's kind of changed hands. I did drive out there recently and I snapped some photos of where that encounter where I said I felt like I was saved by a Sasquatch. Mm-hmm. I snapped photos of that and I got kind of like a weird image of something in the woods, but it's obviously grainy. So, mm-hmm. But it is very strange. I'll email it to you and let you look at it. Oh, I have another picture I meant to get you, but I haven't got it yet and I will send it to you. So are you familiar with William Faulkner and Rowan Oak, his home, Rowan Oak?
I'm familiar with the author, but not so much his home. Yeah.
Okay, so he has like a plantation home in Oxford, Mississippi. And it's like notoriously haunted and it's a historic site. So I had to get married there. And I got married on William Faulkner's front porch on Rowan Oak in Oxford, Mississippi. And I spoke with the curator, and I was kind of a big nerd with him. And I was like, please, I'm a huge nerd. Please let me get married on this porch. And he was like, I respect that. Okay. So he was really cool. And as a gift for me, it was a very small wedding. I mean, I had 6 people, and they were all like, either gave birth to me or was there when it happened. And like my husband's family, very small and intimate, but very beautiful. Our 2 children were there. So the curator arranged for me as the bride to have a private tour of Rowan Oak while the ceremony was being set up. So I got to go through Rowan Oak by myself right before my wedding and in my dress and all that. And I am going room to room begging William Faulkner to attend. I am begging him. And it's just me and him. And I had put a little shot of Jack Daniels, like a little flask of Jack Daniels up under my dress because that's his favorite. And I took a shot of it and I said, to you, William, and thank you for letting me use your house for my wedding. And I took a shot for him. And so I'm doing the ceremony. My mom takes a picture and we're looking at pictures, and there in the window where he would sit sometimes is a face, and he has a very distinct mustache and very distinct eyebrows. And when you look at it, you can see the face and mustache and eyebrows in the window. And I'm convinced that he attended my wedding. If it was not him, it was a little trickster ghost of something on the property that popped up there in the window. But that house has a lot of ghost history. There's paranormal photos have been taken there. It's not the only one. I went at the time where he was supposed to have taken his evening walk around the property. And that was part of the lore, is that at 6 p.m. in life and death, every day he takes his evening walk. And that was when I had my ceremony. And so I was hoping he would show up. But there's a really weird picture. I'll send it to you when my mom gets it off her computer. But I'm almost convinced that he was there because it's a strange photo.
Oh, that's a cool story, though. That's very cool. Sorry I keep stepping back to this, but I love Bigfoot. So just step back. And so was there any talk of continuing leaving food out? Because I've often heard stories that when people stop leaving food, things will, kind of go south and we can have some problems.
So we never stopped doing that. Even after my great grandmother died, I was on that property weekly, visiting my grandma up until the day she died. We were very, very close. I lived with her throughout a lot of my life. And she was kind of no nonsense, and she wouldn't really tell me the stories about the Wooly-Booger the way that my nana would, and she really wouldn't engage with them the way that my nana would. But she would still leave her food scraps out in the same area. It was just something that we did. My mother, to this day, because she was raised doing it, she lives in the suburbs, but she has trees there. To this day, will take food scraps out and put them out in the woods. And I'm like, Mama, what are you doing? She's like, I don't know. I feel like I have to.
Interesting. Oh, that's so interesting. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes. And I have a house here in the woods that I've moved into recently. And I feel myself, I've already put out oranges. It almost feels like I don't know. It's just, it feels like I have to. I agree with my mom. I feel like I have to.
My only advice on that is don't stop then. Once you start, don't stop.
Yeah. And I wonder, because that property changed hands.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's
I have tried to pretty much go buy that property back, but it's been really difficult because it doesn't stay in anyone's hands very long.
Interesting.
And so it's like when I get the information on it and I'm working up the nerve to try and be like, maybe we could figure out how to even just a piece of this property to go camp on or something, because it's gorgeous. It's still out in the middle of nowhere. And by the time I go to look back into it, it's somebody else is there. So I don't think they're having the best time.
And maybe that's why, I've heard thoses stories on Wes's show and other shows as well, that things can go sideways. When they start feeding and then they stop, that seems to be the problem.
Yeah.
But
I've seen the glowing eyes and the orbs too. That is a thing. And I have noticed that like the individual orbs themselves and their eyes in the trees are the same odd, distinct color. And that I think about that because I used to ask my grandmother what those lights were. And sometimes she would just be like, the ball of light, or, oh, that's just like the angels or spirits, whatever, like in a positive way. But sometimes it would be like blinking eyes that were fixed and watching you watch them. You know what I mean?
mm-hmm.
And they would bob up and down on the tree branches off in the woods when we would sit on this big back porch out there overlooking the woods at night. It was kind of a nightly thing. And I would say, what's that? Because I was curious. And she would go, oh, those are owls. Those are big old owls. And she was the type of woman that she had a rifle on the gun on the porch right there. And if anything came around, like, a bigger animal she didn't want around, she would shoot off into the woods to scare it off or something
Mm-hmm.
because she just didn't want it on her property. And I had a BB gun and I was allowed to do the same thing, just, shoot BBs into the woods at raccoons, just whatever. And she would always tell me, don't shoot at the big old owls, which was weird because we shot at everything, like BBs,
Yeah.
Yeah, but I was not even allowed to shoot BBs at the big owls. But I had never seen owls group together, really,
Right.
like every night. This would have been 2 or 3 owls, 2 with blue eyes, 1 with yellow, that were watching and blinking and different levels of the trees, never hooting, but they would whoop off in the distance, but they were silent when you could see their eyes. I just don't believe they were owls.
Yeah. And the orbs, did they come around at the same time or were they separate?
So I feel like it would be kind of separate. It would be like within days. I would never see them on the same day. And orbs and balls of light, I did not see as often as I saw the eyes. The orbs and balls of light were usually more, I would have to be out in the woods further than I was supposed to be when the sun was going down. So I didn't see that much because I would be in the woods in the time that I was told I wasn't allowed to be in the woods.
Right. Yeah. Did they have color to them?
The orbs, they
Yeah.
were the same color as the owls, quote unquote, owls' eyes that I would see.
Okay, so blue and yellow.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
The same weird color. In the daytime, when I've seen Bigfoot down here, they're either like black, but when I've seen them and heard them in the day, they look very different when I would see them between the trees in the day than they look at night. Like I have seen kind of like hairy shadows kind of in the trees in the day, but I've also seen down around the pines things that looked very similar to the hairy shadows I would see at night, but a little off, like different because of the daylight, maybe. I don't know. So I sent you a picture of something that just seems very odd.
Yeah, I can
But
see
yeah,
it,
it's on that. Yeah, it's all in that area where weird things would occur. And
the one of them, like it's blurry, and I look, my own photos are this way too. This isn't a comment on your photography, and it may in fact be that we cannot take clear pictures of this stuff, but the one almost looks like a giant owl as I'm looking at it.
That's what I think.
Okay,
Yes,
all right.
I specifically didn't mention that I thought this creature looked like an owl, but yeah, that is exactly what I think too. And I just took that photo a couple of weeks ago out there where I had this encounter. So so I showed that to my husband. I've never seen anything like that. I had a Bigfoot that was trying to get in our garbage, or was in our garbage can, when I came home working a double shift one night, and I saw him cross. I say him because I believe that's what it was. Very distinctly cross right in front of me. And I saw like black shaggy hair at the elbow. I saw the way the knees bent. I saw the muscle definition, and he just stepped, boom, boom, and disappeared. So I have seen a Bigfoot right in front of me at night. But I've never seen anything looking like that.
So
But I took that.
you were in your
picture
car
for me.
when you saw it cross in front of you?
Yes, I was. I just pulled up in the driveway. And that was like another rule. They always said when you come in after dark, because I worked double shift at a restaurant there, they always said, give yourself a few minutes before you get out of the car. And they told me, my grandma told me that was because, what if there's like a big cat, mountain lion, this is the country, this is the mountains. So they would always say like, pull up, leave your headlights on, just kind of sit for a minute, take a look around. You don't see anything and just, head into the house. So I had my window down and I pulled into the driveway and I'd like left the headlights on, but I'd parked the car and I was kind of sitting orienting myself, which I like to do anyway. And I heard like a sound and I looked up and directly in front of me, there's like a big shed, like that stores like farm equipment. So it's big. And then there's a space, just maybe the size of a wide hallway. Like think about the size of like a school hallway and between this shed and my grandma's house. And there's a floodlight on the house in the shed. And the recycling bin is on the other side of this shed, kind of in the front of it. And I'm looking at the side of the shed in the front of the house. And this big hall of light is kind of right in front of me. So I heard this sound and I kind of looked and I didn't see anything. And the floodlight had went off from me pulling the car up. And so I rolled up my window and I hit my headlights and I sat there for a minute because I love animals. So I was thinking like, even if it's a raccoon, I want to see it because I love it. So I was sitting in my car because I wanted to see an animal. And between the shed and the house, my dad is a professional bodybuilder. He's very muscly. And he would walk past my door with this like big muscly gait. It looked like that. Like a big, huge, like 8-foot muscly man just stepped between the shed and the house, that space. And then like right as the floodlight blinked on, it was like stepping away and I could just see like a big black hairy elbow. And
wow.
Like that was it. And then I kind of was like, oh, because it was huge. And I was thinking like, that's the biggest spirit I've ever seen because it looked all black. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, that's the biggest spirit I've ever seen. What was that? Like that had to have been a huge man. That couldn't have been a man. And then as I'm like thinking like, what was that? I just kind of see this like weird round head just kind of pop around from the side of the house and really fast and pop back. And then I was like, oh my gosh, and I kind of heard a little bit of like trees shaking, like running down through the woods. That's the way to the river and the creek there. And I waited for a second. And then that was at a point where I was kind of thinking, what do I do with this information? I decided I would pretend I never saw that and I would never tell anyone. And I went inside. I was, probably between 17 and 20 when I worked at that restaurant. I went inside and just acted like I didn't just see that.
The scary walk from the car to the house?
It was a fast run to the front door. And then I just was like, okay, not going outside tonight.
Strange Familiars is made possible by our patrons. If you like Strange Familiars and you'd like to get extra content besides, you can become a patron at Patreon. It's patreon.com/strangefamiliars. All of our patrons get commercial-free versions of the weekly shows, plus full extra episodes. We do at least one every month. Sometimes we do more. To check it out, go to patreon.com/strangefamiliars. Once again, whenever I finish the Hermit book, which is taking me a little longer than I thought, as it always does.
It's like construction at your house. It's always about double the time you think it's going to take.
Once I get done that, we'll probably be raising the rates. But if you get in now, and as long as Patreon lets us do this, they've let us do this since the start of the podcast, so I think they'll let us keep doing this. You'll be grandfathered in, and you'll pay the rate you enter in at. So if you get in now, the entry-level rate is $4 a month. When the rate raises, you'll stay at that level. Like I said, as long as Patreon lets us do that. Once again, it's patreon.com/strangefamiliars. We also have a plan on Apple Podcasts. It's called Patron of the Strange there. If you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, you also get the commercial-free weekly episodes and the bonus episodes monthly. And I'd like to thank all of our patrons, no matter where they support us. Thank you so much. with this active, like, sort of spirit life, and I know you said you at some point sort of equated, the Woolly-Boogers to a form of spirit. Do you think that they're a spirit, or do you think they're more akin to an animal, or do you have any opinion on that?
I think they are both. Well, people are animal and spiritual beings at the same time.
Yeah.
So, they're probably just that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just think it's something we just don't understand.
Yeah. I mean, that's
I know that
no matter what they are, we certainly don't understand exactly what they are. Yeah.
Yes. And I go back to same thing when I was talking about my experience with, ghosts and spirits of that nature. With me being raised that, ghosts and spirits are, yes, they're real and this is how you deal with them. And, I knew that was a woolly booger. I did not know that a woolly booger was a Bigfoot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I knew that woolly boogers were real and I knew how I was supposed to handle them. So I remember them the way that a lot of people remember, learning to play catch or learning to ride a bike. It's this exists. And like, it's just nothing in me ever felt the need to say it was something else or block it out or forget it, because I had very intelligent people around me telling me it was real.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of very intelligent people, this grandmother that I lived with on this Bigfoot property, she was divorced, and her husband, my grandfather, lives in Huntsville, Alabama, and he's an engineer. He helped design the moon rover and put man on the moon.
Okay.
And he's a NASA aerospace engineer. He worked at Boeing, Redstone Arsenal, all of that. He's a wonderful man, brilliant man. And he has told me my entire life that aliens absolutely exist. And when he was sketching the designs for the rover, for the lunar mission, they basically had to live in this bunker in NASA while they were doing most of this. And he received a very important classified file, and he was told to account for extraterrestrial life, meeting extraterrestrial life. So he had to put some sort of barrier that could somehow eject or something. He had to put something into the design of his portion of the lunar rover to account for if they encountered extraterrestrials, would they need protection? It was up to him, basically, he said. So he designed like a shield, basically like a convertible kind of, that was supposed to go over the rover in case they didn't like how things were going with the extraterrestrial life that they encountered. Because at this time, as they're trying to put man on the moon, my grandfather, who's a NASA scientist, said he received a file that said, we know there's life out there. We need to account for it because we might run into it on the moon.
Huh. Wow.
And he's maintained that my entire life. He's very no nonsense. He's a man of science. And he operates the way you would expect a man of science to. This is what it is. This is fact. We work on fact. We know this to be true. And he would just tell you, no, aliens exist. I'm a NASA scientist. I had to account for it. They're real.
Wow.
And he said he thinks that it is more intelligent to account for extraterrestrial life than to not. I mean, that was how he explained it to me.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly have my issues with, what we call the extraterrestrial hypothesis in terms of explaining every UFO that way. But the flip side of that is, it's a great big universe, and to think that we're the only intelligent life seems pretty prideful in a way,
Yeah. But the whole thing about like scientists don't believe in that, they do. My grandfather is a brilliant man, and again, that's one of those things that I've had just circumstantially in my entire life. So I have kind of grown up a little weird where I'm like, ghosts are real, aliens are real. I know it. Like, just very calmly. But, if you think about like a lot of religion, people are raised in the church. They hold those beliefs their entire life. Sure. Those beliefs are very comforting for them. I feel that way about this kind of spiritual world that we live in. I feel very lucky to have been guided through the world in such a way that allowed me to keep my mind so open.
Are you carrying on these faith healing traditions?
I do my absolute best. I will practice the medicine that I know among people who are close to me.
Mm-hmm.
I teach my children. We have a house here in the woods, and I teach them, how to use plants and all kinds of stuff, weather patterns. Just, I do my absolute best. But I've found actually that people are not that really interested
No.
in it anymore. And that was actually what convinced me to start speaking to you and Wes, because I had all of this information, and my husband would try to tell me to share it, and people would just think I was making it up or crazy, and I would get very frustrated because I didn't feel like I was presenting anything sensationally. I felt like, and I am a scientist. I am actively, working as a research scientist here in Birmingham. I'm very educated, and people know this about me, and I'll tell them things that I just told you, and they will look at me like I'm insane or just, full of it.
Yeah, no,
So,
yeah. My own wife has called me crazy. It's all right. So, was there anything with the faith healing that was written down, or was it all just passed orally?
it was all out in the yard, out in the forest, out in the field. That
Mm-hmm.
was the way she taught me everything. These things, like how she would tell me, sit, listen, and that means they're here, stay inside, and they won't mess with you. The whoops, I would hear them just whoop and scream. Sometimes they would just scream, and it would scare me. I mean, it would shake me in my bones. And I'd be outside just before dusk, just before we had to go pull all the curtains and stuff, and with my great grandmother. And I would hear like that whoop close by.
Mm-hmm.
And then off up on the mountain, something would let out just this horrible scream. And I would look at her just terrified. And she would say, "They're not mad, baby. They're just looking for each other. They're not mad."
Wow.
Yeah. It's like, how do you teach that?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, well, if somebody probably taught it to her,
Yeah. Like she's the type of woman that she birthed 3 of her babies out in that yard herself, like
Wow.
in the field. Like, yeah, she had something like 10 children, maybe 5 of them survived, had all of them at home. I mean, at that time, this was a very isolated. As my understanding, there was my family, one other family, and it was mostly native land. And from what my understanding is and what I've read on the microfiche, it was like a pretty peaceful deal between, like, we left plenty of space, like we didn't encroach or anything, but we kind of lived side by side with the native people way, way back when this was being settled. And I think that my family learned a lot. I think that maybe they were of the time that maybe they just quietly settled far enough away that they didn't let the original inhabitants, maybe they didn't feel threatened. I think that maybe they learned, because a lot of, in my research, what I'm finding, a lot of what my grandmother taught me has roots in like Pennsylvania Dutch. I found a lot of stuff in like that medicine, and I don't know if that's just mountain medicine or what, but a lot of those home remedies and sayings I've heard my great grandmother say. Native American stories. I know a lot of regional Native American stories told from her directly that I've read later on in my own research, and it's the oral things I heard from her. So I don't know where she would have gotten all of these stories from, being out there in that holler like that. But somebody passed them on to her, and she passed them on to us, but she never left that holler her whole life. She stayed there her whole life. So she would know.
Well, I know the long lost friend did make it, and powwow traditions did make it to pockets of Appalachia.
Yeah.
And I'm sure these different techniques were traded around, even if she didn't have the book, At some point in your life, you meet somebody else who does this, and they're like, "Hey, here's a treatment for, stomach flu," and they'll sort of trade these remedies. So that makes a lot of sense that there would be some commonality there for sure.
Their church was big on the river revivals, like "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou," like that stuff. And people from all over would come to these, and it would be all kinds of people to have these river revivals. And this is, sometimes there would be like the snake handling thing. Her church didn't do that, but I have seen it, and I've been in a church when someone brought someone in to my grandmother's because they were possessed. And honestly, I didn't believe it at first. I thought that, and I still kind of am on the line. But here's where I come to this. If you believe it's happening to you, then honey, you're possessed. Okay. That's, you know what I mean? If you're seeking help for something and that is how you're expressing it, I believe you, is how I'll put it. So they brought a person in with her family who was possessed, and she was very ill. And they began doing what they do with their healing. And it was very intense. And we were in the church, and there was a lot of prayer and a lot of movement and a lot of noise. And everyone was surrounding this one woman, and I'm probably 10 or 11. And everyone's surrounding this one woman, maybe 10, 15 people. It's a small congregation out in the woods. And she's writhing on the floor, and they're praying and speaking in tongues, all of that. And I am left alone on the church pew to just observe, because my grandmothers were the healers. So this was normal. I've seen them perform these things before. It is unsettling. It's scary. I'm not going to lie. It's scary. But I knew what was happening. So I was just sort of sitting, waiting for it to end with the like kind of creepy feeling it always gave me. But usually it just kind of ends and everyone's okay. And then we go home. So I'm sitting there, and I remember this woman kind of arching her body and making this really scary sound. And then I remember the church kind of, I can't remember what they were saying. I probably couldn't have even made it out if I were paying attention. Kind of the swell of voices, you know, just in unison, getting louder and louder. And then I felt this, it felt like a gust of wind shot down the aisle beside me, like right beside me, enough that it made my head turn around to see if someone had run down the aisle, like maybe someone needed help. But there was no one there. And I turned around, and the big double doors to the back of the church flew open, and the front door to the church flew open. And then everyone said, the demon is gone. And I have not, I don't know what to make of that.
Sure, yeah.
And I was just a little kid, and I have asked my grandmother, I've asked my great grandmother, what happened? And they were just like, there was a bad spirit attached to her spine, and we had to get it off of her, is what they said to me.
Huh.
Yeah. And I asked my mom, because that was her mother and her grandmother that did it. And she would just say, like, yeah, that's just part of their church. She's like, if it scares you, you don't have to go back. But I was like, no, I'm going back.
Wow.
Yeah, but then that's probably like one of the scariest things I've ever experienced, but also one of the things where I was like, okay, I don't know everything. I don't know anything.
Yeah. Well, from my perspective, I feel like you're lucky to have been raised with the reality of spirits, because so many of us were not. I mean, I guess I was, in the sense that, you know, I was raised to believe in the Holy Spirit and angels and things like that. But as far as the world being populated with spirits, you know, of these different kinds, it just didn't occur to me. And it's something like that I came to later, you know, and it must have been, in a way, a very, very magical childhood to be raised that way. And I'm a little bit jealous.
You're right. I would not change it for anything. I feel like circumstantially, I found myself around some very amazing people, and I guess I was just curious, and they just, you know, taught me a lot. I asked a lot of questions. So.
I mean, there's a lot of talk these days about, you know, re-enchanting the world, which I kind of fight back about, because I think the world's been enchanted. We just need to recognize it. We need to re-enchant ourselves. But it sounds like you really grew up within a, sort of an enchanted world. Within your family and the culture around you sort of recognized it as enchanted, as being populated by these spirits, which is I think is a wonderful thing. And I think it's a thing we've lost in much of society, and to our detriment.
I agree. That's kind of why I wanted to start talking to, I guess, like the bigger public, go public, I guess, and just say like, okay, I'm a rational, logical person, and I've had a very weird life, and I have told close friends and family enough, and I'm in a matter of fact way, because I just want people to understand that a lot of this is very matter of fact. And just because it's weird or unusual doesn't mean it's untrue. Things can be very unusual and still exist. Things can be rare and still exist. And that often makes them quite beautiful. But just because it's rare doesn't mean it isn't real.
Yeah, absolutely. What's the most recent thing, supernatural thing that you've experienced?
The most recent cool thing is I have a weird thing with owls. I know a lot of people are scared of them. I have a weird thing with owls. Other than that weird, slightly owlish picture I just sent you, that's probably the most recent thing. But just before that, like I said, spend a lot of time with nature. My husband knows I'm just kind of odd. And I will talk with animals. And I was hooting back and forth with an owl for some time that lived in a tree outside of our house. And one night I told him, I said, there's a spirit around, because I can just kind of tell sometimes. And I would say, there's a spirit around, and he has never seen anything with his eye. And then the owl hooted at me, and I kind of like in my head, I was like, where is the spirit? So the owl flew to another tree across the street, hooted from that tree. And I told my husband, I said, watch right over there. There's a spirit, and a apparition of a woman in a dress is what I saw, just kind of like floated in front of us. And that was the first time he ever saw an apparition.
Oh, he got to see one too.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I think he might have saw something a little different. But I mean, I can have him describe what he saw. But I waited to see what he saw first. And I was kind of like, okay, I'm going to jot down like what I saw. And then I said, what did you see? And he was like, I just saw like a white figure floating like 2 feet off the ground.
Wow.
Which is what I saw. But I saw more detail. I could see the folds of a dress. I could see feet just above the ground. I could see long hair. It was quite beautiful, actually. It was very beautiful to me.
Wow.
So when I could see what was clearly a woman, to him was just like a white blur.
Mm-hmm.
But we both saw it at the same time.
Yeah, I don't think that's terribly unusual. I mean, I have this story where John and I were both looking at the same light, and I saw something different than he saw. So,
yeah.
I think sometimes that's the way it is with this stuff.
Yeah. And I think that plays into the like rarity of it, is that I think that we could be looking at the exact same thing and our brains would process it differently because it is unusual and we don't quite know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to logically ascribe things to that a little bit different. So I think that's why people disagree and say that stories aren't cohesive.
Right. Right. Yeah.
But it's because even in the same sighting, it's not exactly perfect, but somehow both are still very valid. And unless you've been there, it's very hard to understand how true and real that is.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And again, when we were at Pine Ridge and we all saw the hiker and we all thought he looked slightly different. Each person thought he looked slightly different than the next person. Yeah. On the morning of April 18th, 1961, Joe Simonton saw a silver disc on his farm. He went out, investigated, and actually stepped aboard the craft. There he encountered 3 dark-skinned humanoids who handed him an empty jug. He filled it with water and brought it back to them. In return, they gave him some pancakes. TJ, would you eat the pancakes?
Would I eat the pancakes? Oh, instinct. Yeah, I would. Yeah, I would taste the pancakes. I would. My logical mind wanted to say, no, you should take them back to the lab and study them. But I would ask for half to study and half to eat. And if I survived eating them, I would want to study them. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think they gave him 3, if I remember correctly. I think he tried 1 and then 2 were left. So he kept 2. That's
what I would do. I would strike a deal.
All right. As we were going, you said you had this intense sleep paralysis story. So I had to get that too. So I hit record and let's go ahead and get that story. So is there any background that we need to know for this?
Yeah. So I guess I would say maybe the dark side of having your mind so open is that I had a lot of sleep paralysis for quite a few years. And For me, my sleep paralysis demon was actually a cat. It was a black cat. And it would start just kind of being on the foot of my bed, and then it would lay on my chest and try to suffocate me. And sometimes it would run across my chest, and I could feel its claws like a real cat running across my chest. I could feel it, but I did not have a cat when this was happening at all. I had no cat. So that would happen to me. So I was getting kind of attacked in these dreams. I would have sleep paralysis, that there were two small beings at the foot of my bed and one slightly larger being with its hand right behind my ear. The most terrifying sleep paralysis I had was when I was very ill, was not feeling well at all. And I was in bed and I was on my back and my arms were down to my side. And sorry, this is like so scary. I had sleep paralysis and it felt huge. It felt huge. And I opened my eyes and all I could see was a giant creature, like standing on one side of my bed and leaning over, arched over my body with its mouth on my wrist. And I could see what looked like a little bit of blood, like it was sucking blood from my wrist. And my head was kind of turned to the right, which would have been the feet of this animal. And the feet looked like the cross between a rabbit and a lion, but they were huge. And the body was arched over me, and the body was kind of shaped like it would be a bull. But the face was like flat. Like, have you seen like Where the Wild Things Are? How those faces are?
Yeah.
It was flat like that, like the flat mouth. But it had like a bull body and like rabbit lion feet. And it was hunched over me and was like pulling blood from my wrist. And I remember, you know how you kind of wake slowly from sleep paralysis? I could only stare at its like weird feet and just have the knowledge that something was hunched over me in my bed. And I felt a weird pressure on my chest and arm. And so as I kind of am able to move, I just kind of move my head slowly to the other side. And I see it like sucking on my arm, and like it's heaving, like it's sucking something out of my arm. And I open my mouth like I'm going to scream, but I can't scream. I don't think I'm really even open my mouth. Best I do is like a deep, quick inhale where I go like that. And when I do that, it turns its face and looks at me, jumps off of me, and is like kind of like a bit smaller than it was when it was stretched over me, I guess. Jumps off my bed. My door flies open like enough to where it like knocks a chip into the drywall and shaking. My uncle was on the other side of that room in this like movie room that we had. And he was watching a boxing match and he heard the door hit what have been the backside of his wall. So he immediately comes running in because he was right there watching a match. Immediately comes running in. I'm still in my bed. And he said, "What was that?" And I said, I don't know. I said, "My door just flew open." And he said, he looked at me like I'm obviously in my bed. I have my sleep mask up over my head, everything. And he kind of pulls the door back and he's like, "It chipped the drywall." And I was like, "I don't know." I said, "I had a nightmare. I woke up because the door flew open. It woke me up." And he was like, "Yeah, that's weird." And he was like, "Have you felt, he's like, do you feel okay? Are you all right?" And I was like, "Yeah, why?" He's like, "You look very pale." And I was like, I just need to go back to bed." And he's like, "Okay." And then he closed the door and went back to bed.
You said you've had a lot of sleep paralysis.
Yeah.
How old are you, roughly? You don't have to get too specific.
Me right now?
Yeah.
34. And no, I've not had it in 4 years.
Interesting. Yeah, I hear it fades in your 30s. It did for me. Well, I'll still get it occasionally, like hints of it, but not like the full blown, like heavy stuff.
Yeah, me too. Like I'll get that, like, oh gosh, I can't move, but then I tend to wake up. Yeah. Or maybe I go back. I don't have that. There's no entities anymore, at least to my knowledge. Yeah. And it really doesn't happen to me that much. And I heard that on your show right as it started happening to me. And it felt like such a synchronicity because I swear maybe like a few weeks before, I was like thinking like, this is weird. Like I haven't had that in years, and I've had it my whole life. And it was like the next time I listened to your show, that was like what you were talking about, how it was ending in their 30s. And I had just reached my 30s.
Yeah. And I'll still get it here and there, but not with the intensity that I used to. Do you think it is, just an artifact of sleep, or do you think more is happening with that?
Oh, I mean, the spiritual world is all around us at all times. And I still struggle. Like I said, I'm very logical, and I still struggle with a lot of things logically, but I was raised to believe that there are spirits in this world, and they will attach themselves to you. Just like people, they have needs and relationships, and these are spirits. So, I have to just say that I think that there is a very active spirit world, and it doesn't flip on and off with the light switch. It happens all around us all the time, whether awake or asleep.
Yeah, my impression with this stuff has been that it's sort of a both end thing. In other words, there might be a medical explanation for sleep paralysis, but
for sure.
But it also gets the attention of these things, and somehow they're like, "Oh, look at that! Now there's somebody I can mess with," or whatever, however they do it. I don't know if that's what they're thinking, but it somehow sends a flare up or something. Yeah,
I feel like I was saying, like I work in research. I'm a behavioral scientist, and I mentioned to you me seeing that exorcism in the church when I was very young.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that I said to this person, they believed they were possessed, and they asked for help accordingly. So to them, it was real.
Mm-hmm.
Whether I can say there was a spirit on that person, or whether I can say clinically, this is your diagnosis, I think that both are equally true and untrue, and just as unique as the individual you're speaking to. I think that it could be a little bit of both, actually. I think that our ebbs and flows of our own energies as a human ebb and flow with the spirit world around us, and that we have this sort of symbiotic relationship that we don't even understand, just sort of the way we do with the moon and the tides. This affects our body, and we don't even realize it because we're so used to it, and it's just kind of invisible for the most part. But it does affect us, and it's still real mentally, physically, and spiritually. I think these things can live together in scientific union and all exist happily if people just open their minds a little and say, there's two sides to the coin. Could it be a spirit attached to a person who's struggling with their mental and spiritual self? I don't think that's too far out of the realm of the universe to say that may happen.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I don't know if you heard my whole story about the abduction dream I had, and then I had all these weird physical health things afterwards, and it may in fact be that just my body knew stuff was up, and I, sort of had this dream to sort of represent the stuff,
But doesn't that make it real in itself?
Well,
if that's how your body is understanding it?
Yeah, I mean, right? That's kind of the point. Like it's like sort of a both end thing, right? There is a spiritual element to it, I think, along with the physical. Now, it's a chicken and an egg, though. Like, which came first? But
how many words for water are there across our globe? But we're all speaking about water. We're just saying it differently.
Yeah,
it's kind of how I feel about, is it real or is it not? Well, it's just a million ways to say water, right?
Yeah, there you go. TJ, thanks so much for sharing your stories. They were wonderful.
Thank you for having me.
Well, you know what? Not to call anything in, but, given your life so far, I'm sure you're going to experience more. And if you do, where we are, please share your stories with us again.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you. So we had a couple curiosities of the week, but we realized we need to do some research on them.
Yeah, the worst thing you can do is just throw something up and be wildly overinflated or underinflated.
Exactly. Yeah, we want to.
So I picked out something that I was like, I don't really know what to price this. My thing is I usually try to like look for what things sold for and undercut it. Like I don't usually like to be more than or even what, like, because I always like a bargain myself.
Sure.
So I always want something reasonable. But I have no idea how I got these magic. Well, I don't know their level of magic. You can imbue that yourself with it.
Kind of a crystal ball.
Yeah, I got a crystal ball, but I don't.
We don't know if it's glass or crystal. We got to do some research. We'll figure it out. I found this occult booklet, but it might be super rare. We have to do some research on that too.
Yeah, so
there's no curiosity of the week this week, but there should be the episode art. I plan on doing episode art. I haven't done it yet, but I plan on doing art for this episode. There should be the episode art. That's available on Etsy. That'll be in the show notes. If you click on that, it'll take you to our Etsy shop and you can purchase the episode art. I do that probably most episodes I do the artwork for. By most, I mean, it's, 51% maybe. I don't know what it is. I try to do the episode art. Sometimes I can't, or sometimes it makes sense if I'm interviewing an author. It makes sense to put their book up as the art or whatever. And that's a nice way to help the show, and you get some original art as well. So while you're there, you can check out our Etsy shop and get Strange Familiars t-shirts, stickers, mugs, and more. Allison has a selection of ephemera listed there on Etsy. There are my books. If you get them from us on Etsy, they come signed. I sold out of the rosaries, but I'll make some more soon. Got some more of the rosaries with the antique crucifixes coming. And there's other artwork up there, prints and originals. Check it all out. Our Etsy shop name is Lost Grave. Links are always in the show notes. But if you type in Strange Familiars, you should see our stuff come up on Etsy. Thanks everybody who supports us that way. That's a huge help as well. We did our giveaway for the Haunted Objects in York, the tickets for that. Stephanie won those tickets. So thank you to Stephanie, and we'll see you there. We'll be going. Big group of us will be going on, well, by the time this drops, it'll be tonight.
Yeah.
So it's tomorrow night as we're recording, but it'll be tonight by the time this drops. See everybody there who's going, and thanks for listening. We'll be back soon with more Strange Familiars. Strange Familiars is a production of Dark Holler Arts. Intro and background music is by Stone Breath. If you want to hear more or purchase music, go to stonebreath.bandcamp.com. We're on Instagram at Strange Familiars, no underscore, it's all one word. We're on Facebook, facebook.com/Strange Familiars. The Strange Familiars Gathering group is there. You can join that and talk with other people about the weird and wonderful things we discuss here on Strange Familiars. You can find Strange Familiars merch at strangefamiliars.com/merch. And strangefamiliars.com is where you can find everything else.
From which you bleed. Red is the road that brings you to me. White are the lilies in your way. Quietly walking like some lost saint. And lo, the blood falls at your feet. And colors red the waving wheat, and runs upon the swaying ride. There is a blood moon in the sky. And now we walk by her red light, two wandering pilgrims in the night, two fish stars are only diadem. And lo, the blood falls at your feet, and colors red the waving wheat, and runs upon the swaying ride. There is a blood moon in the sky. Brother of stars and winding ways, brother of song through night and day, brother by time, by drought or flood, brother by deeper root than blood. And lo, the blood falls at your